Let's get this sports podcast party started, all right?
The JAYREELZ podcast.
What is happening, my good people? Greetings. How are you? How's it going? How's everybody doing out there? What is the latest and greatest? Hope everybody's doing well, feeling fantastic, in excellent spirits. We're exactly 2 weeks away from Thanksgiving, 6.5 weeks to a new year, but literally seconds to what you've been waiting for. Unadulterated, unfiltered, opinionated, and of course, unapologetic sports talk, as this is the JAYREELZ podcast with your host, JAYREELZ. For my first timers, welcome aboard. And for those who've been banging with me going back to the very beginning, somewhere in the middle, or even as early as this past Monday, I welcome you guys and gals back. And tonight uncovers the quote-unquote second half of the NFL season. Now that all the teams that have played 9 games, and even though with the stupid 17-game schedule, it's uneven, unbalanced, etc., but now we could put the first half aside. If you didn't listen to the podcast on Monday, definitely check that out if you want to get a recap of what the first 9 games and the first part of this NFL season was all about, which I did not grade it very well. But you could definitely go back in the archives, just a few days. That's it. Just go back to Apple, Spotify, even here on YouTube for those that are watching at JAYREELZ on my YouTube channel. You could definitely take a peek as to what my thoughts were for the first half of the season. But now, as I mentioned, put that aside. Let's talk about what's going to take place tonight in Philadelphia, which you have a great game between the Commanders. Let's see where they stack up now as they get into the teeth of their schedule. Yes, they got rid of the garbage with the Giants. Those are the only 2 division games that they played. And granted that the Cowboys, yes, I understand that they are a stone in the ocean falling all the way to the bottom. But they are still the Cowboys, I guess you could look at and make it possibly surprise even a team like the Commanders, a young up-and-coming team led by their quarterback, Jaden Daniels, as we know. But more on that and the weekend in a few moments. But I want to talk about the second half and what to possibly expect here as we get ourselves ready, heading into the holiday season, into Christmas, and of course, once the ball drops for 2025, we'll just have one more week left before we can even think about the postseason, and before you know it, it'll be here. But with right this very moment, I'll start with the AFC and how we're looking at the way that is shaping up. And you have 2 monster games, and I understand maybe that's what I should just segue into, considering as we get into a Week 11 schedule. But you have 2 heavyweight matchups in the AFC, and a lot of them will have to pretty much figure as the puzzle's starting to be put together. Granted that there's still plenty of games to be played, but with KC and Buffalo, right now they're currently your 1 and 2 seeds in the AFC, and that is just a gargantuan game to see who could possibly get the 1 seed in home field. And granted, you still have plenty of games to be played, as we know, but we would think that whomever is going to win that game will be in the driver's seat for a 1 seed. So if Kansas City does win in Buffalo on Sunday, 425, they will have the tiebreaker for sure, because they'll have not only a 2-game lead in the conference, but also 2.5 when you factor in the head-to-head matchup. And if Buffalo happens to win, they'll be tied with the same record, or in fact, they would not be, because the Chiefs, who already had their bye, and the Bills haven't, they will, yes, be 9-2, but the Kansas City Chiefs will be 9-1, so they will have a half-game advantage at the end of the weekend if the Bills were to prevail. But as we all know, if they do end with the same record after Week 18, then the Buffalo Bills will have the 1 seed. Then you have another big game in the 1 o'clock window where Baltimore will go to Pittsburgh, and this is the first division game for the Steelers here as we approach the middle of November. And we know how this rivalry has lasted here for 2 decades and what it's meant not only to the NFL, but really when you think about all of sports. Granted, it's not as sexy as Yankees, Red Sox, or even Lakers, Celtics, or even if you want to throw in Ohio State, Michigan, of course, North Carolina, Duke, when we talk about all sports. But Baltimore-Pittsburgh is one of those sneaky underlying that, although it doesn't jump out at you like the aforementioned rivalries, but when those 2 teams play, whenever it's that week or that game to come about on the schedule, that's where people say, ooh, Baltimore-Pittsburgh, yeah, let's see what's happening. Let's tune in. We know it's going to be physical. We know it's going to be rough. We know it's probably going to be a 1-score game. Generally, it's usually a 3-point game, whether it comes down to a last-second field goal or maybe with the team trying to march to get the go-ahead touchdown if it's 24-20 and they fall short. Yes, Ravens Steelers is definitely one of those once upon a time, hide the women and children, or as I used to call, a body bag type game. But as we understand, the NFL isn't built that way anymore. And yes, you'll have your moments, especially in this rivalry, because these two teams hate one another. But we know that currently with the Steelers at the 3 seed and with the Ravens not having their bye, if the Ravens win, they will leapfrog over the Steelers in the division and will be 8-3, and obviously have the head-to-head tiebreaker advantage. And if Pittsburgh wins, they'll be 8-2 and have a game and a half lead over the Ravens, which will be big time for them, especially with Russell Wilson now a bit of a renaissance here. Starting quarterback for the last 3 games, has won those 3 games. Granted, Jets, Giants the first 2. All right, the big touchdown throw to Mike Williams to secure that win in Washington on Sunday. But now, as they get into the deep end of the pool, division games are going to be on deck, 6 of the last 8 within the division. So let's see what Russell Wilson's going to do as you have a huge game there. And we'll talk a little bit more about it from a standpoint not only of the just permutations and everything that I just discussed on how big this picture will look once these teams play one another, and especially after this weekend, but even more detailed as far as Lamar Jackson not having a lot of success against Pittsburgh throughout his career and what this game means. Is it more for Pittsburgh, more for Baltimore, same for Kansas City and Buffalo as well. Then when you look at the rest of the AFC, how it's going to shape up is going to be this. Those bottom teams, and I'm talking about pretty much the 7 seed, because even though when you look at the Texans who will have the 4 seed, not to say it's going to be a lock, but we would think that even if Baltimore, Pittsburgh, whomever is going to come out of the AFC North, you would think those first 3 seeds will be Kansas City, Buffalo, Baltimore, or Pittsburgh. And then Houston, right now 6-4. To me, with the Texans, I got to see them win on the road. And yes, we know that they are a very good team. We know that they're a team that could, obviously on any given Sunday, could beat a big-time team. But yes, can Houston go to Baltimore? Can Houston go to Kansas City? Can Houston go to Buffalo and win a playoff game? That's the big question with the young quarterback and young coach. And we could say that, yes, they could pick off any of these teams because they have the young coach in the one, DeMeco Ryans, and obviously the second-year quarterback in C.J. Stroud, who has shown maybe he's taken a little bit of a step back, more so in the last few weeks, but we all know that he has a big future ahead of him. And granted that they're just getting started with their window of being a team that could challenge and maybe even compete in the AFC, and not just for playoff positioning. We're talking about getting to a championship game, which the Texans have never done in their history, or even get to a Super Bowl for that matter. But to me, I got to see them go on the road in a cold environment in order for me to believe that this team is going to have some legs going deep into January. Not to knock them, we just haven't seen it. So that's the one thing that I will have to have a big question mark surrounding that franchise right now moving forward, at least for this year. And then when we look at the 5, 6, and 7 seeds, you got Baltimore, you got the Chargers, and Denver right now. And of course, that could flip-flop between the 2 and the 5 once we get to about 4:25 on Sunday. But you think Baltimore or Pittsburgh is going to be entrenched in that spot. The Chargers, 6-3, you would think with Jim Harbaugh as well as the quarterback Justin Herbert, they're going to be fine. And I understand that the Chargers, they're a franchise that always finds new ways to lose. But who knows? Maybe the culture has changed a little bit with Harbaugh being at the helm. So I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. The franchise overall, still have to wait and see. But it is a different year, and it seems to be a different makeup. And granted that the Chargers, they're another team. Who have they beaten along the way? They lost to Kansas City earlier this year, as we know. They lost in Pittsburgh in week 3 when they were 2-0 going into that game. And they're a team that you have to wonder whether or not, similar to Houston, if they could go on the road, cold, hostile environment to win a big playoff game. And then you have the Broncos, who we've seen over the last 2 weeks on the road in big spots, whether it was in Baltimore where they were flat as a pancake, or last week in Kansas City where they had a shot to upset the Kansas City Chiefs and put a loss for the first time in their column for the year, but that foiled with a last-second block field goal. But Denver, they showed some spunk, they've shown some fight, and although I don't think they're going to be a team that even if they do qualify for the playoffs, they're not going to be long for it, but this is a big step for Sean Payton in the Mile High, especially with Bo Nix as quarterback. It's one of those things where this is going to be a moral victory for the not only the team, but for the franchise overall, because they have done nothing ever since they won that Super Bowl there, the last one in the last year of Peyton Manning there, Super Bowl 50. And then after that, there's a significant drop-off. And yes, you could talk about the talented Bengals who are currently tied with Indianapolis for, you could say, 8th place. But after that, you do not have a team that's going to threaten, as of right now, the 7th seed in the conference. And right, what can the 7th seed get you? Chances are sacrificial lambs to the 2 seed in the wild card round of opening weekend in the playoffs. But I would think if there's going to be a team that's going to come out of that, whether it is Denver, Indianapolis, forget about it. And now they're going to go to Anthony Richardson, back to him against the Jets on Sunday. And Richardson, he's a guy that, yes, has talent, but is very raw at the position. And not only that, combine that with his just injury history over the last 2 years, last year with the shoulder, him having to leave the game because of bruised ribs against Pittsburgh, and then also tapping out because he was tired, having Joe Flacco come in, and now it's time to put Richardson back under center to start this coming Sunday. I don't think the Colts are going to be long for this playoff picture or this whole AFC playoff drive. So to me, it's going to be Denver or Cincinnati, because I do not believe in Miami right now, although they're 3-6. The Jets, I get it mathematically. Those 2 teams are still alive. Forget about New England, Cleveland, and all the way down. But people are going to start to think with the Jets, if they could beat the Colts on Sunday and get to 4-7, and they do have Jacksonville on their schedule. They still have the Dolphins, and I get it, the Dolphins could say, well, we have the Jets on the schedule. Understood. But maybe somehow, some way, if the Jets could run the table, not necessarily win 7 straight, but win 6 of 7, could they be a team at 9-8 would get in at the 7th seed in the AFC? To me, I'll believe it when I see it, because the Jets have been a disaster here, as we know. They have not been in sync. We saw that in Arizona there on Sunday, and I don't care who they're playing. I don't care if they're going to play a Pee-wee team. The Jets right now, you can't have the belief that they're going to all of a sudden magically just go on a winning streak or win 6 out of 7 and see if they could be part of the playoffs there when we get to the middle of January. So to me, that spot, how I look at it, is going to be between Denver and Cincinnati. And Cincinnati, as we all know, talented offensively, defensively, forget about it. Even though they have Trey Hendrickson, leading pass rusher, I believe he leads the league in sacks right now. But other than that, they do not have a defense that's going to have offensive coordinators shaking in their boots. So for the Bengals, based on their recent track record, I get it, they didn't make it to the playoffs last year, but they did have a winning record. And then obviously the 2 years prior, a Super Bowl appearance and an AFC Championship game appearance. And with Burrow healthy and slinging the ball over the lot, throwing 5 touchdowns here, 5 touchdowns there. Granted, it was against Baltimore, and obviously they're not going to see them for the remainder of the year. But I would think Cincinnati, with their recent pedigree, and although do you have a lot of stock and belief in them, much so better than the Colts, Jets, and even the Broncos for that matter. So I would have to put them in the mix, despite the fact that they're a game behind. And Cincinnati will play Denver later on this year. I believe the final game of the season. No, that's a lie. The next to last game, because Cincinnati's going to play in Pittsburgh. But that is going to be a monumental game for the Bengals to win in order to get the tiebreaker. So I would see Cincinnati getting in the back door to kind of wrap up the AFC playoff picture, which is not saying much. And then in the NFC, you pretty much have the same deal where you have Detroit, as we all know, they're leading the conference. Philadelphia right behind them. Atlanta and Arizona right now are your 3 and 4s, which is a little bit different from what we've seen here in recent years. Obviously, Tampa's won a division dating back to the days of Tom Brady, and even the last couple of years. Brady's last year at 8-9, and then last year with Baker Mayfield at 9-8. But they're currently on the outside looking in, as well as the San Francisco 49ers, who are usually either a 1 or 2 seed. But now, if the season ended today, they wouldn't even be in the playoffs. They're currently 8th in the NFC, but with those 4 seeds, and then you have Minnesota, Washington, Green Bay. Here's the thing. I think when you look at this playoff picture, San Francisco, at the end of the day, I think they're going to win a division. To me, similar to the AFC, who's going to be in that bottom rung? Because other than the 8th seed currently with San Francisco, and let's say if they do catch Arizona, we would think they're only, a half game behind them, because Arizona hasn't had their bye yet. And I believe they may have their bye this week. I'll check that in a minute. But for similar to the AFC, you have a significant drop-off after that 8th seed in the conference. You have the Bears at 4 and 5, and they seem to be in disarray, and Matt Eberflus looks like he's going to be out in a rail when the season is over. The Rams at 4 and 5, they're up and down, and we could talk about Matt Stafford, and we could talk about the magic of Sean McVay, and I'm sure he's going to have a few moments here throughout the remainder of the season, but still, they have just been so inconsistent, and just when you think that they've broken through and that they're going to maybe make a run and do well in the conference or even in the division for that matter, and granted that they are a game and a half behind the Cardinals, but remember, they already lost to the Cardinals earlier this year, so they're already behind the 8 ball, but I don't trust them fully. Same for Seattle. I don't trust them as well. Tampa, they're 4 and 6. You can forget about the division because they got swept by the Atlanta Falcons, and therefore they're going to have to get in as a wild card unless the Falcons absolutely collapse. And then after that, just like the AFC, a drop-off significantly. Dallas at 3 and 6, New Orleans, Carolina, and I could just stop right there. So with San Francisco currently in that spot, and you would think that they're going to overtake the Cardinals when it's all said and done. And think about this. The Cardinals have the tiebreaker over San Francisco, even if they have the same record as of right now. Now, San Francisco has to go to Arizona later on this year to have that rematch because remember, the Cardinals won in Santa Clara earlier this year. So you have to keep that in mind. It's not an automatic slam dunk that the Niners are going to win a division. But we would think based on their track record and based on what they've done here over the last half decade, you would think that when it's all said and done, they will end up being a 3 seed at worst because Philly and Detroit, you would think, even with them being currently 2 games and 3 games ahead of them, that they'll be in good stead there in the NFC, somewhere in the middle as a 3 or 4 seed. And sadly, that's what it's going to be. These races, unless teams are going to rise from the dead, a la the Jets, you want to say the Dolphins, I'm not going to buy that as well. Or even if the Bears, Rams, Seahawks, and the Buccaneers in the NFC, this is going to be a situation similar to baseball. Because remember how I talked about in the baseball season as we got into August and September? I said, wow, you're only going to have a National League wildcard race and a little bit of an American League race. You got to thank the Tigers for what they did there from the middle of August on. But the division races, whether it was the NL West, whether it was the AL and NL Central, now I understand AL Central was a little bit more competitive, but still, the Guardians went going away, Yankees went going away as you got into September. You have division races as of right now that whether it's in the AFC East, that is a foregone conclusion. Whether it's in the NFC South, that's a foregone conclusion. You have a lot of these teams, and even to a certain extent, the AFC West too, with the Chiefs having a 3.5 game lead over the Chargers because they already beat them head to head, and that was in LA. With the wild card, you're not going to have much. Yeah, you may have seeding. You may have a situation where teams are going to leapfrog over one another, but it's not going to be a jam-packed log jam where you have 5 teams that are going to battle it out for the 2 spots in each conference. I don't see that right now. And I get it. The NFL is king. The NFL is supreme. The NFL is bulletproof, the shield, etc. But you may have a second half here that could be just as boring and just as, I hate to say it. Now, boring is probably the worst thing you could say about the NFL, but it's just going to be average. Unless some of these teams are going to come back to the pack or rise from the dead, as I mentioned, you're going to have these last 8 games just be a scenario where is Philadelphia going to leapfrog over Detroit for a 1 seed? Or are the Falcons going to collapse and then Tampa's going all of a sudden, and Tampa has a pretty weak schedule, I might add, but still, what's going to happen there? Nobody's going to really care about what's going to happen in the NFC South or whether or not Tampa or Atlanta or teams like that are going to make some hay when you get to January. Bottom line is this, before we get to this weekend's games, I see 6 teams, 3 in each conference, that could get to and win a Super Bowl. Kansas City, Buffalo, Baltimore in the AFC. But JAYREELZ, you forgot Pittsburgh. Aren't you a huge Steelers fan? Yes, I am. But because of the way the schedule is, and even though they're 7-2 and they lead the division, but because they have all these division games, and I'll tell you this right now, mark my words. If the Steelers do win on Sunday, and I think they have a good shot to win on Sunday. Now, it's going to be high scoring, as we know, because people could say, oh, the Steelers defense, so on and so forth. I think the Ravens are going to score points. And I'll get to that more on that game in a second. But I can see them letting down in Cleveland the week after that. Can you see that? I can see them having a knockdown, drag-out, 15-round fight against the Ravens here on Sunday. And it's not even Sunday. That's actually a Thursday night game. So for them to recover after what's going to be a physical, emotional, and I would even think to a certain extent spiritual and psychological 60 minutes, and then to turn around and go to Cleveland, which a lot of people are going to think, especially if they beat the Ravens, oh, they're going to kill the Browns. And I don't even know the Browns are playing this week, and I'll take a look in a second. But watch them beat Baltimore and then just 3 nights later or 4 days later go to Cleveland and lay a big, fat, giant deuce. And that is your quintessential letdown game. And then the week after, although they have a mini bye, 10 days off, they have to go to Cincinnati to play the Bengals. And who knows where the Bengals will be at that point. So that's how I'm going to look at that game. So that's why I'm not even putting Pittsburgh in the mix as far as teams that can win the Super Bowl. Let's get to the end of the season and see where the playoffs shape up, and then maybe I'll reassess that. Well, I will reassess it, but maybe I'll think about it a little bit more as whether or not the Steelers are a bona fide Super Bowl team. And then Detroit, Philly, and I have to throw in San Francisco. And I get it, San Francisco, the Niners have been nicked up, they've been banged up, they've had all types of controversy heading into the regular season and injuries, etc. Yes, we could talk about all that. But you have to put the Niners there, especially if they're going to end up as a 3 seed. So I think Philly, Detroit, San Francisco, and KC, Baltimore, and Buffalo, those are your 6 teams that could go and win a Super Bowl. Other than that, I'd be shocked. I don't see Atlanta. Sorry, I don't see Minnesota. I don't see Washington. I don't see Green Bay. I certainly don't see the Texans. Forget about Denver or Cincinnati. And yes, you could say, oh, any of these teams can get hot, even the Chargers for that matter. Yes, they can, but as I mentioned 15 minutes ago, can these teams win on the road? If the Chargers had home field throughout, maybe I'd think about that differently. Or if a team like the Falcons had home field, and even then, I wouldn't be super confident to think that they could go to a Super Bowl like they did in 2016 under Matt Ryan. So your NFL here in the second half, I'm not going to say it's going to be ho-hum, but it may be a carbon copy of the first half, which if you didn't listen to the podcast, and I'm not going to tip my hand as to how I graded that, you're going to have to go back and listen for yourself. But let's just say that it wasn't very good. Now, as far as your schedule this week, Washington and Philadelphia, to me, this is more on the Commanders tonight than it is for the Eagles. It's on the road. It's going to be cold. It's going to be a crazy environment. And I'm sure the Eagles, who have played well here over this recent stretch, I think that they're going to, I'm not going to say it's going to be a blowout, but I wonder what the quarterback, Jaden Daniels, knowing that he's going to get into the deep end of the pool, this would be interesting to see. If they stay competitive and lose a 27-24 game, that could bode well for this team. If they lose in convincing fashion, let's say they hang with the Eagles for a half, but then the next thing you know, it's 30-13 Eagles. All right, they hung for a half. Okay. Still not going to have me think that, oh, the Commanders are going to be a team to reckon with in the second half. Yes, they're going to be a team that is going to be good and formidable, but are they going to be a team that's going to get to that level? A team that you're going to really take seriously. And if they get blown out, I mean, if they lose 38-10 and we're not in the game at all, then you're going to think that the clock's going to start striking 12 with this team. And right, they'll have their moments throughout the rest of the season, but they're going to lose in Philadelphia in just a blowout fashion. That's going to make me think that I don't know if Washington is ready for primetime. And yes, here they are in primetime. This isn't Cincinnati on a Monday night earlier this year where the world didn't know what to expect from a Commander team. Now people have an idea that, okay, they're going to be competitive. They're going to be in this game. Division game, tough game, physical game. All right, show and prove it. Now, if they win the game, that's going to be a whole different story. And the narrative will be different, at least from this week, moving on to week 12. But for right now, let me see how they're going to fare. I would think the Eagles, I could see that being like 2 heavyweight fighters trying to feel each other out. And yes, maybe a key turnover and changes the trajectory of the game. But I would think Philly will prevail. I don't know what the spread is. I'm not big on gambling and spreads, but I would think Philly will prevail, whether it's a backdoor cover on their part or just a second half where they cruise to victory. I could see that happening there tonight in Philadelphia. Now, the 1 o'clock games, as I mentioned before, the big one is Baltimore-Pittsburgh. I'll get to that in a second. The other 1 o'clock games are just flat out garbage. Green Bay at Chicago, all right. Can Chicago rebound off of that dreadful performance against the Patriots there on Sunday? At home, I might add. So we'll see what's going to happen there. Jacksonville, Detroit, that's a dud. Minnesota, Tennessee, another dud. Vegas at Miami, all right. Can Miami rally the troops to see if they could maybe go on a run here? But still, that's a dud. Rams at New England, that's a dud. Cleveland at New Orleans, another dud. Indy at New York, all right, you want to say because Indy's 4-6 and maybe the Jets could go on a roll, but this is a game that is certainly down on the rung of 1 o'clock games. And then you have Baltimore-Pittsburgh. And how I look at this game, to me, this is more on Pittsburgh, I think, than Baltimore. But you know what? I'll reel that in for right now because the narrative of Lamar Jackson playing against the Steelers, and granted that a lot of these games that he's played, and he's only played 4 games against Pittsburgh over his career. A lot of the games, if you recall, last year in the final game of the season, that was in Baltimore where they wrapped up everything so Lamar didn't play. And it was also another year, I believe the year that the Ravens won 14 games or 14-2, and there was another scenario where that was the last game of the year and Lamar didn't play in that game. And then if you recall the prior 2 seasons where he was injured and didn't play those final few games, that was another scenario where the Steelers and Ravens were on the schedule and he didn't play. So it's not as if he's had a boatload of games against the Steelers, but he's 1-3. He's thrown a lot of inexplicable passes, interceptions. Just think back to the game last year, and I was actually in Paris at that time. It was week 5 where the Steelers won 17-10 and they had a chance to put the Steelers away. I believe the score at the time was 10-8, and all he needed to do was just punch it into the end zone to where they would have had a 2-score lead, and he threw just a terrible pass, a terrible interception in the red zone, or in the end zone, I might add, and then the Steelers came back, that touchdown from Kenny Pickett, remember him, to George Pickens, where he torched Marlon Humphrey on the sideline there late in the game, and the Steelers won. But I would think, as much as Lamar's just saying, hey, it's another game against a big opponent, we got to win the game, so on and so forth, I'm sure in the back of his mind, he has to think that he needs to win a game against Pittsburgh, and especially in their building. And with the way that they played on offense this year, and with the way the Steelers defense, it's a good defense. I've said it a million times. If people want to call this an elite defense, they could say so. I've watched this team year in, year out, and we can just talk about this year. Oh, I understand. But this is a very good team. Defensively, it is not a great team. It is not the Steel Curtain. It is not Blitzburg. It's not even the defenses that they had going back to the Super Bowl 43 when they won the Super Bowl that year in 2008. No, it is a far cry, despite the fact that they have a ton of talent there, and we know who the cast of characters are on that side of the ball. But I think this is going to be tooth and nail. This is going to be interesting to see how these Steelers are going to perform and respond here. And I think they know that this is an important game. If they win this game, they'll have an edge on Baltimore moving forward, at least until they meet there in the latter part of December, where they'll have a Saturday game before they play the Chiefs there on Christmas Day. But something tells me, and this is not a reverse jinx, I think this is sticking in the head of Lamar Jackson as a game to show and prove, to know that Pittsburgh has been their nemesis and his nemesis in his own right. And I could see this coming down to a situation where there's a Steeler turnover late, and then Lamar has to go the length of the field to punch it in the end zone. And I could see that being a 21-17 game, and then Baltimore prevails 24-21 in a typical nip and tuck, back and forth, down to the wire type of game. I hate to say it. I could see that. Because I'm sure the Ravens, knowing, and now with Derrick Henry in their backfield as well, and all the weapons that they have, and who knows if Deontay Johnson's going to be a fixture or a factor in this game, considering he's going to face his former mates. Not to say that Deontay Johnson is Lynn Swann or John Stallworth or a guy that's coming back to Pittsburgh with any type of fanfare, but still, I'm sure he's going to be chomping at the bit to try to get back at his former mates. So let's see. And then the 4 o'clock window, Kansas City and Buffalo. Now, Buffalo has done well against Kansas City in the regular season, but we all know the postseason has been their bugaboo. And Buffalo, I would think, with the way that they've played here over the last few weeks, and we know Kansas City has been undefeated this year, but Kansas City has been flirting with fate from the standpoint of them eking out these games. Whether it was the Monday night game against Tampa, and we could go to a plethora of games where they've been able just to squeak by and not blow teams out and not have big leads and not have the Kansas City Chief offense of the past where they're going to put up 35 in their sleep. They have just been able to get by with these games. Like I mentioned, Tampa, of course, by the skin of their teeth winning against Denver. So I could see Buffalo coming out fast and furious and Kansas City hanging around, but I think Buffalo's going to win this game on Sunday because they've done well against them in the regular season. Kansas City, they're due to lose. They cannot continue to win these games where they're literally on a tightrope, walking on dental floss to try to get to a finish line and secure a win. So that's not to say that Kansas City can't win this game. I'm sure they can, and who knows? They probably will. But Buffalo, I think, knowing that the tiebreaker and wanting to get back at the Chiefs, not only just because of the playoff game last year, but wanting to actually have a shot to host in their building again, I think Buffalo's going to win a close game. And then you have Seattle and San Francisco. There's a 4 o'clock window. Atlanta, Denver. I mean, Atlanta, Denver, look at that. That's a game, AFC, NFC, and two teams that are playoff teams as of right now. It's constituted if the season ended today, but that's not a game that you're going to be running to the sets to see. And in Seattle, San Francisco, we talked about this when San Francisco beat them in Seattle on that Thursday night. I think they're going to put Seattle out to pasture here because Seattle, as we have seen, they already lost to the Niners, they already lost to the Rams, and right now they'll really be in danger if they lose this game of doing anything as far as winning a division. And then your Sunday night game is Bengals at Chargers. Not a bad game, good game. Let's see if Cincinnati could get themselves back in the win column, especially after losing there that Thursday night to the Ravens. And then you have Houston and Dallas is your Monday night game. You could pretty much go to sleep. Your byes are Giants, Arizona, like I mentioned, Tampa, and Carolina. So you have three terrible teams that aren't playing, and Arizona on the come up with a game there, or with a bye there on Sunday. And then one thing I want to mention before I move on, NFL-wise, John Robinson, who I know we can even talk USC, who had a great record there as the head coach of the Trojans, but also in the mid-'80s was the head coach of the Rams, took that Ram team 85 to an NFC Championship game before losing to the Bears, if you recall, 24-0, and Dieter Brock died at the age of 89. Thoughts, prayers, condolences go out to the Robinson family. Very good career. Better in college than in the pros. Actually had a stellar record in college. I believe it was like 104, 35, and 4. Just a stupendous record there as the head coach of the Trojans, and then obviously parlayed that to the Ram coach when they were in LA at the time. But thoughts, prayers, condolences go out to the Robinson family, the Rams, etc., NFL on his passing. Now, keeping the helmet and shoulder pads on with the college football and the latest polling and the committee, how they break it all down if the season ended today, what the playoff picture would look like. And just like I had last week with a couple of problems, this week I have 2 more problems. One with the ranking, and 2, even with, and I guess I'll start there. Right now they think that Georgia is out of the playoff mix, because if I were to break down the brackets, you would have your 5-12 matchup is Ohio State, Boise State, followed by Penn State, Ole Miss. That's your 6-11. 7-10 is Indiana, Alabama, and Alabama's the 10 seed. And then Tennessee, Notre Dame, 8-9. Where your top 4 seeds are Oregon, Texas, BYU, and Miami. And of course, you can't mess with those seeds, or you can, of course, the structure of where those teams lie, but because you have to look at it as the conference, where you have Oregon in your Big Ten, Texas SEC, BYU Big 12, and Miami ACC. So there's no fooling around with those 4 teams. I get it. You could say, well, wait a minute. Indiana should be up there. But of course, you're going to have Oregon as the top seed. And remember, Ohio State isn't in that top 4, although they're ranked in the top 4 in the nation. But again, the top 4 is going to go to what the conference leaders are as of right now. And of course, we all know that could change once we get to the conference championships. But not having Georgia there, then you're going to ask, well, what team's going to be out? JAYREELZ can't take Boise State out. I mean, Boise State's been a team that has been obviously very good, and you have to have one of those at-large teams get in, so you have to throw them in the mix. All right, you can say that. You're not going to take Alabama out because they beat Georgia, and you can't take Ole Miss out because they beat Georgia. But there's a lot of people that are going to think because of their pedigree, and remember, last year Georgia didn't even make it based on their loss to Alabama in the SEC championship game. But the one problem that I have, and I understand that Tennessee, because of where their standing is right now, but you could argue whether or not Tennessee belongs there. Because when you have Georgia, who, as we look at the rest of the schedule, and we would think that they're going to get in, who do they have? Georgia Tech in their final game, forthcoming, and I'm pulling up the schedule as I speak right now. So bear with me as I get that. But your argument here for Georgia is this. If they beat Tennessee this coming week, obviously that's going to flip-flop. But Georgia, we could argue whether or not they could be in, but they can't. So people are already having a problem with that. And that's why problem number 1, you cannot argue whether or not Georgia belongs in the top 12. There isn't. I just gave you the case that, all right, well, what about them overtaking Boise State? They can't because they have to have an at-large team in there, and that's Boise State. They play out of the, the Mountain West Athletic Conference. So that's where they're going to be part of this mix. You can't take them over Alabama. You can't take them over Ole Miss. Those are the 2 losses that they have. And Tennessee, yes, if they beat Tennessee, and then they have UMass and Georgia Tech, which could be a tricky game, but all 3 of their games are in their building. Yes, they beat Tennessee. They're going to be back into the college playoff mix. But there are some people that think, well, Georgia belongs. Well, let's see how the rest of the season is going to play out before we could think that, oh, wait a minute, Georgia's out. That's criminal. Their pedigree. They didn't make it last year. We understand, but they should be able to be at least in that top 12. You can't argue that. What we could argue is the second point is the college football playoff standings, and granted that they are part of the mix, but how is Penn State ranked 4th in the country? The one game that they absolutely had to win in their building against Ohio State, they lost. And yes, Ohio State's ranked number 2. We know Oregon's 1, Texas 3. Penn State should not be there. Give that spot to Indiana. Now, granted, Indiana, they're going to play Ohio State forthcoming, and that's going to be a huge game. That's going to be their game similar to when Penn State played Ohio State. Now, granted, Indiana has to go to Ohio State, and that's going to be tricky in its own right. And I believe that game, as I pull up the schedule here, that game is not this coming week, it's the next week. And they have a bye, which is good. They kind of rest so they can gear up for that game where they have to go to Columbus. But I would take Indiana. Indiana should be the 4 seed if you're going to look at not only the rankings, but also the standings. They're undefeated. They're 10-0, where Penn State is 8-1. So why not give Indiana the 4th spot in the country? I would have. So I don't know how that poll with the AP and the college football rankings, to me, that didn't make any sense to have Penn State there ranked number 4 because of what they did in losing to Ohio State. Obviously, that's going to change, and we would think that that could be a bit of a shakeup. Now, Penn State alone the rest of the way, it's not as if they have a slog of a schedule. They got to go to Purdue. All right, at Minnesota could be tricky, and then Maryland is their final game at home. So we would think maybe they could lose at Minnesota, not out of the realm of possibility, but I would think that Penn State, and who knows, if they do lose a game, will they be awarded a playoff spot with a 2-loss team? And chances are we're going to see a couple of the 2-loss teams, and maybe Georgia could be one of those. And as we know, Alabama, we think they're going to run the table. They're a 2-loss team, but Penn State, let's see there. But I thought that was just a shame how Indiana should be ranked number 4 in my eyes as opposed to Penn State. And as we look at the college football schedule, as we understand that a lot of this could change. Georgia could catapult themselves back in the mix there with a win at home against Tennessee. And that's going to be the big game here this coming weekend. Because when we look at the schedule, Texas at Arkansas, can the Razorbacks pull off an upset? I don't know. Utah at Colorado, that's going to be a game that a lot of people are going to watch. And we understand that Utah played very competitive and it was controversial there to some people against BYU. But can Utah at least be in the game with Colorado there come Saturday at noon? Then as we look across the rest of the schedule, the 3:30 window, Louisville, LSU at Florida. Forget about LSU. They already have 3 losses. They're not going to make it. Missouri, South Carolina. So 7:30, the primetime game is Tennessee at Georgia. That is your college football game this weekend. There isn't any other game that you have to pay attention to. Yes, upsets can happen. Things could certainly change at a dime. Whether or not Arkansas could put on their upset helmets and shoulder pads, or if Utah could hang around and maybe pull off an astonishing victory there in Boulder. But to me, this week is all about Tennessee and Georgia, and we'll see how that shakes down as we'll revisit the whole college football scenario there on Monday and see where we lie at that time. All right, now let me put on the high tops as I go through the association to get to the NBA. And right now, a couple of things. Newsworthy items, which I'll get to, but yes, I talked about it on Monday as we got prepared for the NBA Cup, and you have to go back and listen to that, people. Apple, Spotify, JAYREELZ.com, as well as the YouTube channels at JAYREELZ, and also video on Spotify. Don't forget that. But I get it, they're trying to add some flair. I get it, they're trying to, forget about the games. To me, I can't get into it. I know I got a comment on my YouTube channel when I made a mention of it a couple days ago, and I got to respond to that person. So shout out to you, my guy, who was actually into it. And God bless for those that are into it. I'm not going to shun. I'm certainly not going to be a person that says, shame on you. How could you even watch this, follow this? If you want to do that, fine. I can't get into it. I'm sorry. I just cannot. But I delve into it further on Monday's podcast. But these things with the courts, I feel like I need those old school 3D glasses to watch these games. I mean, seriously, the courts are an abomination. I feel like I'm going blind watching these games. And it's really hard to see what it is. It's almost like watching the Smurf turf there at Boise State at times. To say, wait a minute, is that supposed to be green? Just like the court is supposed to be that tan color or that wood color? No, I'm watching blues, I'm watching reds, I'm watching greens, I'm watching all these crazy colors. And it's just mind-numbing. And I'm not trying to say that. I'm sure the 20-year-old is probably saying the same thing, although they probably will look at this, hey, we'll add some flair, it's a little bit of fun. Nonsense. I can't. Not for me. But what we have here over the last few days, I know on Monday I talked about the Cavaliers. Now they're 13-0. Give it up. Only the 6th team to go 13-0. And on the top of my head, if I have to go through these teams, I know the Warriors were 24-0 at one point. I'm sure you had the Chicago Bulls team, 95-96, who won 72 games, as we know. And I'm sure there are a bunch of other teams. I think the Rockets also were another team that's 3. And the Rockets, I think, are the only team, the 94 Rockets, that started off with 13 straight victories and have won an NBA title. So just keep that in mind if you're looking back in the history books. But Cleveland, as I talked about Monday, what more to say that I could add to what they've done? And now as we look at their schedule, I believe they have the Bulls coming forth, or upcoming, I should say, they just played the Bulls, I might add. Then they have, the schedule's all out of whack. What's going on here? Here we go. Yes, they do have the Bulls. They play them tomorrow night. They also have the Hornets on the schedule there on Sunday, and then they go to Boston on Tuesday, which chances are that could be the next time where they could potentially lose a game. I can't see them losing to Chicago and Charlotte, both in their building. So at Boston, and if you want to look behind that, at home to New Orleans, Toronto, and then a home and home against the Hawks. So what we're looking at right here is that if they don't lose to the Celtics, who knows? Maybe they could go deeper into the month with this winning streak, but one game at a time, where Bulls, Hornets, and then at Celtics Tuesday, when we talk about it on Monday, we'll see where the Cavaliers stand as far as their record goes. But you have that. You have a couple of other things where LeBron, another triple-double, actually his third straight triple-double, as he's a month away from 40. I'm not going to extol his greatness, brilliance, etc. But the guy is just, we're never going to see a guy like this ever in the history of the NBA. I mean, think about it. The guy is pushing 40. And he just finished completing his third straight game of a triple-double. Where last night against Memphis, no John Moran, I might add, but just phenomenal with what he's done. And then you had Klay Thompson go back to the Bay Area there on Tuesday night. Thunderous ovation and applause that certainly well-deserved. Goes on to sign with Dallas. We knew the writing was on the wall. And certainly played well in the game. 6 of 12 from 3, had 22 points. But Steph Curry had a big fourth quarter. I believe had 37 points in the game as they were able to outlast the Mavericks. What was it, 120 to 117. So a triumphant, or I should say a close to a triumphant return for Klay Thompson. Obviously did not get the win, but certainly all the accolades, the applause, the thank yous, etc. Again, well-deserved for the future Hall of Famer. Then you had Victor Wembanyama had his first 50-point game against the Wizards last night, and hopefully he could be a guy that could carry that torch once LeBron exits stage left, whenever that's going to be. But Wembanyama, 50-point performance where San Antonio, and I have to throw this in there, Gregg Popovich, as it had been reported, suffered a mild stroke. That's why he's been out, not coaching the sidelines there for the Spurs. Talked about him having an illness a couple of weeks ago where he had to check himself out, but now recovering from that mild stroke. Don't know when he's going to return. I'm sure he's going to take his sweet time, and hey, he deserves that. He's 75 years old. We know the accomplishments and everything that he's done as a coach of the Spurs, 29 years. Think about it, 29 years. He's been almost Belichick when he was coaching the Patriots for, 24 years. And now he's coached 29. So he's pushing 30 years. We don't have to talk about what he's done, but hopefully he gets back sooner than later. So wishing him a speedy recovery. Then you had Giannis score 59, and I talked about the Bucks foils over the last few days where he outscored the Pistons in overtime himself and actually scored 22 of the first 24 points of the game for the Milwaukee Bucks. But the Bucks, as I talked about, a team that right now is trying to find their way, trying to find themselves. They just inked Doc Rivers to, what was it, I think a 4-year extension after hiring him halfway through the season last year. So you can't fire him. Maybe there's trade talk about Giannis. He just signed a 3-year extension. That's going to be tough. Lillard, is he showing his age? He's 34 years of age and on the downside of his NBA mountain. And that's not to say that he's washed up or finished or done, but the best of Damian Lillard, I think, maybe in the rearview mirror. That's not to say that he can't have a moment or two. I have a stretch where you're going to see the old Dame, but him pointing to the watch Dame time, that may be a sight that we have once seen and may not see again. So keep that in mind as the Bucks try to get themselves back on the beam as far as the Eastern Conference goes. And then you had a tough break where Chet Holmgren, Oklahoma City Thunder, out 8 to 10 weeks with a right hip fracture. OKC, a young team, as we know, had a big year last year and actually doing very well in the West. Currently in first place, 10-2 with the best record in the conference. And having Chet Holmgren out, they're going to have to find a way to put that together. So we understand it's a long season, 8 to 10 weeks for him to come back. And remember, he lost his first year 2 years ago with a broken foot that he suffered during the rookie league, during the summer league. So let's see if he is able to bounce back and hope for him to get a speedy recovery. So that's what you have with the NBA as far as what's happened here recently. As far as overall, I know the Magic have played well here. They've won 4 in a row. And remember, no Paolo Banchero. He's been out of the lineup. So look at that. The Knicks, all right, they beat the Sixers the other night with they did have Embiid in the game, but no Tyrese Maxey, Paul George, and they didn't have those guys last night against Cleveland. Remember, they're not going to play back-to-backs Embiid, and even though he was interviewed after the game, knowing that the Cavaliers were coming to town, and he said, oh, well, yeah, I know I didn't say I was going to play back-to-backs, but I feel good. We'll see. Did he play last night in the game? Absolutely not. Typical NBA load management. But for the Knicks, then to lose at home last night to the Chicago Bulls, and I know the Bulls are trying to see if they could find their way. I don't know if they're going to be a team that's going to be of any threat here. But to follow up that win in Philadelphia with a loss at home to the Bulls, I think the Knicks, it'll click at some point. But if you're a Knicks fan, if I would have told you that you would start off your season 5-6, you'd be like, no, I'm not going to take that. So that's not a good job by the Knicks to start their season under 500 here after 11 games of their season. And the same can be said for the Pacers for that matter, as they're also 5-7. Other than that, there's nothing else I can really get into. Talking about the Nuggets there. They won 5 in a row, and Jokic had that big game there on Sunday. Lakers turned it around. Remember, they started off, 3-0, and then they were 4-4, and now they're 7-4. So, NBA is still early. You're about, an eighth into the season. Once you get to the 20-game mark, 21-game mark, you're going to be a quarter of the way in, which will be in about another, 3 weeks or so, for another month. By the time we get to the early or mid part of December, and then we'll take it from there. But other than that, that's what you have with the NBA. Nothing else to really dive into. Let's see, you got any interesting games here over the course of these next few days? Tonight, Dallas at Utah. No, scratch that. Knicks Nets if you care. LeBron in San Antonio against Wembanyama, let me enunciate. Memphis at Golden State. Those are your 2 ESPN games there on Friday. Here's your slog of an NBA season. Nothing else to really get into here as I look at it. Then the Lakers go play the Pelicans there Saturday. San Antonio at Dallas. Sunday, which obviously the NFL is just going to swallow up anything the NBA is going to provide. Knicks play Nets back-to-back games. They do. Knicks and Nets, Friday and Sunday, they're at the Garden. So they scratch out those games right away. Dallas, Oklahoma City, if you care. That's your NBA. Nothing else to really unpack. Now as I lace up my skates to go through the NHL, and I tell you, I'm going to be grasping for straws here to talk about what's happening in the National Hockey League because I've talked about them last Thursday. I talked about them on Monday, and I'm not going to talk about them again because even though I watched them there on Tuesday night to play the Rangers, not that I was in the building, but the Winnipeg Jets, who back and forth, but then they exploded there in the third period. Connor Hellebuck, the goaltender, and the Jets right now, they are clicking on all cylinders. Mark Sheffley, a guy that's been a long-tenured Winnipeg Jet, and for what they've done, the record-setting start, I talked about it on Monday, they're on a pace to have 77 wins this year, which is not going to happen. But they beat the Rangers handily in that game, and now they go to Florida as they'll play Tampa tonight, and then the defending Cup champion Panthers on Saturday. So let's see how they fare as they make their way to the southeast part of the nation. But other than that, I don't really have anything to get into. NHL is rather boring. I could talk about the Bruins losing Hampus Lindholm, their defenseman. He's going to be out with a lower body injury. Who knows how long. They're already losing Andrew Peeke out with an upper body injury. So the Bruins depleted there with their back line. So other than that, I mean, what can I really get into? I could talk about teams that have had some mild winning streaks, but is that really anything to say, oh, JAYREELZ, wow, this team's on a roll. This team's doing this or that. And as it is, the one team that has had the longest winning streak in the sport are the Winnipeg Jets. There isn't another team in the NHL that right now has a winning streak more than 3 games, and that belongs to the Colorado Avalanche. And they've had their own injuries, as I talked about here, but obviously they've stemmed the tide and they've played, modestly well here. Other than that, sorry people, I don't know what else to really get into. I don't. That's your NHL, and that's what's going to happen here in a long season. You're going to have these moments where there are going to be lulls where there's not a lot happening. And Alexander Ovechkin, if you want to talk about the Ovechkin watch, still stuck at 863, had the 2 goals there Saturday night against the St. Louis Blues, and since then has not scored a goal. So, NHL, I'm going to pivot and move on. What more can I tell you? And where I'm going to move to is actually going to be fascinating because, no, I'm not going to go to Major League Baseball. There's nothing really to get into there. All the awards, which I thought were going to be this week, will be next week, where you have your Rookie of the Year Monday, Manager of the Year Tuesday, and then Cy Young Wednesday, MVP on Thursday. And nothing with the hot stove, Juan Soto, or anything like that. here over the last few days. So now as I pivot, and I'm going to go to wrap up here with not only boxing, but the UFC. That's right. I'll start with boxing. Is anybody going to get into this Jake Paul-Mike Tyson exhibition bout, which had to be delayed in July, I believe, till tomorrow night, where it's going to be on Netflix streaming live for the whole world to see? And yeah, we could listen to all of what Mike Tyson has said recently, that, oh, the devil is going to come out, and oh, he doesn't know what he's going to expect. And not to say that Jake Paul has said, oh, he's an old man, whatever, but he has said that, hey, I'm younger, I'm faster, I'm this, and I'm paraphrasing here. But Tyson, you know he's going to try to go in there and do some damage. Now, I don't know if this is already going to be scripted, and what I mean by this is that, is Tyson going to unleash the fury on Jake Paul? Meaning that he's going to have maybe flashbacks as he's in the middle of the ring, and he may not be able to see Jake Paul. He may see Evander Holyfield in the back of his mind, or Trevor Berbick, or Michael Spinks, or going down the line of all the guys that he fought leading up to him being the heavyweight champion. Forget about post, whether it was the Peter McNeelys of the world or guys of that ilk. And I'm not even going to talk about when he came out of prison. And yes, I understand he fought Holyfield post prison there in Indianapolis with the whole Desiree Washington situation. But is it going to be a scenario where is Tyson really going to fight and show and prove that he is the baddest man on the planet dating back 3 decades ago? Or is it going to be a thing where, yeah, he's going to punish him, but he's going to ease back to know that he's not going to just have all of the tools and everything but the kitchen sink thrown at him? And to me, that's the one thing that I'm curious to know about this fight. Do I really care about it? No. Do I bring it up because it is a sports podcast? I have to. But come on, this isn't for the heavyweight title of the world. This isn't anything that, I hate to say it, it's a sideshow. And that's not to knock Jake Paul. That's not to knock even Mike Tyson for that matter. I never would, but it is what it is. This is just flat out entertainment. So if Tyson's going to go in there, and yes, he's going to get hit a little bit, and yes, he's going to, I'm sure, land on Jake Paul or whatever, but is this going to be a thing where he's going to go in there and, yeah, I'm going to knock his teeth in? That's what I want to know. And the only people that are going to know this are the combatants. I don't even think the managers, I don't even think the whomever is covering this fight, I don't think anybody, promoters, Netflix, they don't even know. It's all going to lie within that ring there tomorrow night on whether or not Mike Tyson is just going to say, the hell with it, I'm going all out, and I'm going to try to bash his brains in. Or, yeah, I'm going to go in there and fight my good fight, but, yeah, I'm not going to do significant damage as if this was for a heavyweight bout or for however many millions of dollars. And as it is, you know it's going to be, I'm sure Netflix paid whatever it was to get these two guys in the ring. But it's a sideshow, people. And that's all. Do I even need to talk about this Monday? Will I even watch? I don't know. I mean, seriously. Anyway, I'm just going to pivot from there. Maybe I should watch, but I will say this. I have zero expectations of this, and I'm just going to leave it at that. Now, Saturday night, you're going to have a UFC fight right here in the backyard, New York City, Madison Square Garden, where you can have Jon Jones, the Mount Rushmore of UFC, but the very embattled, controversial, mercurial, whatever adjective you want to throw at, and all understandably and rightfully so, he's going up against Stipe Miocic, and I think I pronounced that correctly, for the heavyweight title. And Jones, we know what we're going to get from Jones. The guy is a flat-out warrior, belongs on Mount Rushmore. Forget about the class. It's not the UFC or MMA Mount Rushmore for heavyweights. It is just Mount Rushmore overall. And you could argue whether or not he belongs as number one. And listen, I'm not an MMA, UFC guy. I would think he probably would be number one if you ask me. I'm sure there may be others out there that say, no, he doesn't belong as number one. But I would think a majority, if I took the temperature, they would say that Jon Jones should be ranked number one as the best all-time UFC MMA fighter. But Miocic, I don't know what to expect. I know Miocic, I believe he's 37 years of age. I couldn't even tell you who he fought or what his record is. And again, that's just me being an MMA novice. And I hand raise high in the air. I'm not trying to fake the funk. I'm not trying to portray. I know what I'm talking about. I know Jon Jones, and I know, sadly, more so is outside the Octagon misfortunes than what's happened inside. And of course, what he's done inside has been extraordinary and certainly legendary, but you have to throw the bad with the good. Now, where he is mentally, spiritually, etc., going into this fight, I'm sure he's going to go balls to the wall, in this case, balls to the cage, to try to do what it takes to keep that belt and to keep that stature as being the greatest ever. But Miocic, I don't know. Could he surprise people? Can he throw a couple of strikes, throw Jones off his game, and then next thing you know, Jones is going to tap out, or he shockingly wins by knockout? Your guess is as good as mine. But I will tune into that to see how that's going to shake down. I would think, just based on the reputation and his pedigree, that Jon Jones should come out on top and victorious. But as we all know in sports, stranger things have happened. And similar to Tyson-Paul, as strange as that event may be to a lot of people, more so to the younger crowd, or more so to the older crowd, I should say, to a guy like yours truly, who when you think of boxing, and especially when you think of Mike Tyson, you think about some of those fights that I mentioned dating back to yesteryear. And now, here it is, that we're subjected to a fight that's going to be streamed on Netflix that is an exhibition and isn't a pro fight. This is the world we live in 2024. And with the UFC MMA, who has superseded boxing on so many levels, it's not even funny, just goes to show you the difference between a sport that I understand is archaic when you look at the history of this country, dating back to prior to the 20th century, but how far that's fallen to where the rise of the UFC, as it continues to grow and it continues to just be streamed or taken over in households throughout the country, how boxing is just, sorry to say, a drop in the ocean next to the wave of rush, waterfall, and the flood of MMA and what it's done to the sports landscape in comparison to boxing. That'll do it, my good people. Another episode just about the books, as always. Thank you so much for stopping by, carving out precious time out of your day to listen to what it is I have to say about what goes on in the world of sports. If you haven't done so, people, please subscribe, rate, review. Throw me a few stars, write a review, Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts. Go to my YouTube channel at JAYREELZ. Please subscribe there. Increase the visibility on your social media. Take screenshots, send it to me. I'll share it with my people out there. Again, it's going to go a long way as an independent content creator. That's right. This is my full-time job, trying to blaze a path, carve a trail in earning an income, earning a living. Come on. This is the hustle culture right here. So if you could go ahead and do all those things, I would sincerely and gratefully appreciate it. If you want to hit me up with a question, comment, or suggestion, you can do so at the following. Of course, the YouTube channel at JAYREELZ, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, the JAYREELZ Podcast, Twitter, JAYREELZ1, just a number, the old-fashioned way, the JAYREELZ Podcast at gmail.com. I'll be more than happy to follow up with you guys and gals, because whether you do or do not know, this is what I love to do, people. It's in the blood. It's in the DNA since birth. Talking sports is what I do. Watching sports is what I love. Critiquing it, praising it, you know I would do it all on a week in, week out basis with nothing but fire, passion, energy, fury, with my thoughts, opinions, critiques, praise, analysis, feelings on anything and everything that happens on the world of the diamond, ice, gridiron, hardwood, golf course, racetrack, tennis court, boxing ring, octagon, you name it. From my lips to your ears, from my heart to your soul, from where I am to wherever you are, the JAYREELZ Podcast always comes correct, direct, and in full effect. From the South Bronx, the Southeast, the South Central, the South Pacific, and all points beyond. Peace, love, and God bless everybody. And until next time on the JAYREELZ Podcast, on the flip, baby.